kicking off the year in great style, and we're really privileged to be joined by somebody that doesn't really need an introduction, Mr. Dave Broom. So, look, I'll just add him to the stream and we'll have a chat.
How you doing?
Dave, Happy New Year. Welcome to the show, and thank you for joining us.
Good New Year to you. Lovely to be here. Thanks for asking me on.
Well, it's a privilege, and thank you very much again. So I presume you're working from home down in Hove, South England.
Yeah, I mean, I work from home anyway, so yeah, I'm quite used to this kind of locked-in life.
yeah.
It's kind of what freelance writers do on a regular basis. It's getting a bit tedious. At
this stage, we're all getting fed up with it. Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, one of the things that you do is that you do travel a huge amount, and that's been curtailed completely, has it now for the last while? Or?
Oh, God, yeah. I mean, I did a few wee trips up to Scotland in August when things eased a little bit to get some research done for the next book. But that then stopped at September. And, yeah, I mean, I haven't even planned anything. I know I've got something in the diary for September.
Okay.
So I'm definitely doing something in September, and I might be coming over in March to see you.
Yes, well, that'll be interesting now to see if that happens.
But everything's up in the air, you know.
Yeah, well, we're all hoping you make it over for that. So that's the you're helping with that, tasting the work that Fionn O'Connor has done on heritage malts and malt tasting and different grains. So that should be very exciting. I'm
so looking forward to it. Yeah, it's going to be fascinating. Really looking forward to kind of geeking out and discovering all this amazing stuff that he's been digging up. So yeah. I'm really, really looking forward to it. So.
Yeah, well, I'm hoping now I think it's going to be well attended. The only issue we have now is COVID. So, you know, we'll hope we get around that. Minor problem, but tell me, has anything like that ever been undertaken in Scotland? Something of that depth, looking at different grains? I know they're not as prevalent in Scotland, the different grain usages.
Not to the best of my knowledge. I mean, I know that there's a few distillers looking at different grains, but nothing as forensic as what's happening over with you guys. So yeah, it's going to be very exciting. So yeah, everything in Scotland's been it's quite amusing. 2-3 years ago, I was approached by one distiller who said, "Shh, Dave, we're making some rye, but don't tell anyone. Secret." Fine, okay, great, but let me in. But had a chat, and then about a month later, another distiller phoned up and went, "Shh, Dave, we're making some rye. Don't tell anybody." So it ended up. 4 distillers making rye whiskey in Scotland, all of them thinking they were the first. Obviously, one of them was, but none of them knew that anybody else was doing it. Right. So, yeah,
badly kept secret. Yeah, but is there any other experimentation with other grains other than rye? Have they been doing oats or wheat? Well, wheat obviously for grain.
But wheat's widely used. Yeah. But, it'd be interesting to try wheat at a lower strength. But oats, Inchdairney Distillery, which is just fantastic, really innovative distillery in Fife. They ran oats last year, which was great. I tried the new make; it's exceptionally good. They're doing rye every year, and they're going to be doing different grains or different mash bills as a kind of one-off every year. So I don't know what Ian's got planned for this year, but certainly they will be looking at it. Our Beaky are looking at other things. Some interesting stuff happening with Bear. There's bits and pieces, but nothing substantial.
Yeah, I mean, is there seems to be a new wave, if you like, of Scotch over the last maybe 10, 15 years in terms of cask finishes, certainly. But is there any other leading innovations that you're privy to that are coming up?
Yeah, I don't think finishes are innovative. I shot down flames for suggesting that at the SWA meeting a few years back. Finishes were innovative in the 1990s. Everybody knows them now. I think what is happening now in Scotland, there's a lot of distillers beginning to look at yeast finally.
Yeah.
So I would say, if you're looking for probably the largest area of experimentation that's taking place in Scotch, I think it's probably yeast rather than anything else. Then some cereal experimentation. Obviously, people are still looking at casks, but that's it.
Yeah, the casks is been done pretty much to the death now. We're getting every sort of finish and every sort of maturation.
Yeah, I mean it's there's a few people beginning to use chinkapin.
Okay.
So which is proving really, really interesting.
Yeah.
But probably chinkapin oak has been in the system for years and years. It's just never been marked as such. But people deliberately, Razi are doing it, Glenallachie are doing it as well, and the results are spectacular. So different oak types. I mean, there's a whole lot of, what it's like. I mean, it's whiskey.
Yes.
It takes time for these experiments to come through, so people don't necessarily shout it from the rooftops. As soon as they start the experiment, they wait and see what happens before they go, "Oh, look what we've got." So I think we're at the start of very interesting experimentation. I think there are some other things coming through the system which will be out in the next couple of years, which kind of proves that there's actually been a lot going on in Scotch behind the scenes.
Yeah. Is there a kind of movement towards broadening the scope of the technical file there to allow, for example, other woods?
No, I can't see them. I can't see them doing that. There was that clarification, which came out last year. 18 months ago, about the type of cask which could be used. So that there was kind of, you can use mezcal casks or tequila casks or for Calvados, etc. Which will be interesting. But I can't see any major shift in the technical file.
Yeah.
I'm a great believer in legislation. Sorry, I'm just looking at this. Good point, Connor. I'm a great believer in the legislation. And actually, I think if you look at the Scotch Whisky Regulations, there is a huge amount of flex within them. It's just that industry in the past didn't want to flex that much. It went, well, the regs won't allow us, but there's nothing to say you can't use different yeast. There's nothing to say you can't use different roasted barley. There's nothing to say you can't use different cereals. You can't call it rye whiskey. You have to call it grain whiskey. But there's all these things that you can do within the regs. And I think distillers are now, especially newer distillers who have to find a point of difference, are now beginning to go, oh, hang on, we can do this, and they're beginning to look at that. But that was a really good question or point that popped up there. Yeah, Loch Lomond Distillery, which is the one that is always forgotten. Who just do things their own way. I mean, they're undoubtedly at the forefront of innovation. Yeah, and peated grains is an interesting concept.
I mean, the definition of grains is wider in Scotland than it is in Ireland. In Ireland, it has to go through a column still. Does that apply in Scotland, the use of a column still for grains?
No, because the rye, the ryes which have come out have come through either pot or pot and column combinations. But malt whiskey can only be made from malted barley.
Right.
So then, therefore, everything else is going to be called grain at the moment. I suspect, and almost like contradicting what I just said, I think if rye becomes a significant enough player, in other words, the big companies begin to do it at scale. I know Diageo are already running it. At that point, they may go to the SWA and say, we change the regs.
I just meant to say to our audience as well, of course, it's a great opportunity. If you want to post any questions towards Dave, I'm sure Dave would be delighted to answer them and make comments. So please do put in any questions that you do have. I just wanted to kind of go back, if you wouldn't mind, Dave, and talk about, how all this started. So you're obviously a very proud Glaswegian. Yeah. I see that in all your references, and a Patrick Thistle fan. So, obviously.
That's cheese.
For those that haven't heard, that's not Rangers and it's not Celtic. So,
No.
But you grew up in Glasgow. Obviously, Glasgow is, as you described, a contradictory city.
Yeah.
What was the impact of growing up in Glasgow in your childhood? I mean, how did that city affect your outlook on life?
It makes you think quickly.
Okay.
It's Glasgow's a very friendly place. It has this reputation of being wildly violent, and certainly there was some of that when I was growing up, but it wasn't that bad. I didn't get involved in it. But it's a very friendly place. So I think I understood. It gave me an understanding of community. I think that was it. Give me an idea of trade. It's just one of these things. It's if you're born somewhere, you it's very hard to define what makes it special because it is where you grew up.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it was as you said there, a kind of contradictory place because it's incredibly cultured and it's also rough around the edges. And
isn't that what makes it exciting, and vibrant?
There's always something going on, So incredible museums, incredible art galleries, and at the same time, great punk rock gigs and fantastic pubs. We occasionally I had to watch what you were saying, but there's always I think there's just an energy to it. I mean, there's an energy to great cities, and I think there's also a peculiar energy, and I've noticed this as I've gone around the world. There's a peculiar energy that you get to second cities. So although Glasgow's the biggest city in Scotland, it's not the capital. It's not Edinburgh. So if you're Glaswegian, you always compare yourself. You're the anti-Edinburgh to some extent. And I think Birmingham and London have got similar,
yes.
there.
Yeah.
And Tokyo and Osaka, I have the same. You speak to people from Osaka, they really hate people from Tokyo, and they're really proud of it. And I think there's just something about the energy of a city like that, a big industrial city. It is a good thing. Yeah.
I mean, it's a bit like the Dublin and Cork or Dublin and Belfast vibe that we get here.
I didn't want to dip into any of that, but you're quite welcome to bring that up. Yeah.
No,
I have noticed it between Dublin and Cork. Yeah.
I'll be shunned later on by the Republic of Cork, but you started off. You went to university and you studied in Stirling University there, and it was English was your chosen degree, was it? Yeah.
I did an English degree. Did a bit of film, film studies, so kind of film theory for a year. But yeah, it was an English degree.
Yeah,
and it was great. Stirling's only 30 miles away from Glasgow, but it's kind of a world away. And all my friends went to Glasgow, one of the Glasgow unis, and I was the only one that went up to the wilds of Stirling.
Was it considered that way?
Yeah, it was kind of weird. You tended if you're in Glasgow, you went to Glasgow uni, and if you're in Edinburgh, you went to Edinburgh. Blah blah blah. And Stirling was this kind of, why would you go to Stirling? But it was a great university. I loved it. I didn't do enough work, but I had a great time.
Yeah, and it was in college that you picked up your appreciation of whiskey, or what's your earliest recollection of whiskey?
Earliest recollection would be my dad. My dad was whiskey. My dad was a whiskey drinker.
Okay.
So again, my early memories of that would be him having a dram of a night. My uncle's in whiskey trade. He worked for Black and White. Right. So I mean, whiskey was always there. As far as my first recollection of actually taking a drink of whiskey would be when I was off on a hike with some friends. And we were in the tent in the rain and cold, and somebody smuggled a quarter bottle or a half bottle of famous grouse in it, I think it was, and we began drinking it in central heating. So that was kind of my first taste.
Yeah.
But yeah, it really kind of, it began to become fascinating for me when I left uni. When I don't think I ever drank whiskey at university. but I began working for an off-license chain called Oddbins.
Yes.
And at that point, we had a whiskey selection, and it was in, and you're in Edinburgh, and I think Scotch malt maybe have just started up, and you were kind of in that environment, and as an English graduate, kind of going into the famous literary pubs of Edinburgh, you kind of felt obliged to start drinking whiskey. Charlie McLean, my great friend Charlie McLean, was one of our regular customers. So, it was a slippery slope from that point on.
Yeah. Well, we had Charles on. He's a charming gentleman. It was great to have him.
Yeah.
Great to speak to him.
A man from Edinburgh, he's remarkably nice.
Yeah, I noticed many references to Robert Ferguson.
Yeah.
The Edinburgh writer, who's probably obviously not as well acclaimed as Robert Burns or Stevenson. But he was probably one of the first writers of whiskey. Were you a fan of his? Were you studying his work?
Yeah, I was a huge fan of Ferguson, who I first heard of through Robin Williamson from the Incredible String Band, who kind of mentioned it in one of his kind of long kind of prose poems about Edinburgh. And kind of talking it out and realised, that here's Ferguson, who was the inspiration for Burns, who died aged 24 in the Madhouse in Edinburgh, having produced an incredible volume of work, all about Edinburgh in the Scots language of the time. Just remarkable poems. And when I was doing the kind of background research for the film, for The Amber Light, I wanted to get Ferguson in there. And I was wanting to look at the way in which whiskey had appeared in Scottish literature and become part of the culture. And as far as I can ascertain, I may be wrong, quite happy to be corrected in this, please, if anybody can do. But if not the first reference to whiskey in literature, in English rather than in Gaelic, what was in the Ferguson poems. So for me, it's very, very important because, here's a man writing about the kind of teeming world of Edinburgh, in all its kind of drinking dens and filth and vicious police people and drunkenness and celebration, etc., etc. And whiskey is there at the heart of it. So, hugely underrated writer. So,
I mean, I do see. Obviously, you have a huge interest in literature, and I noticed that you're fascinated by old style, traditional Gaelic music as well, and poetry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very, very much so. And I think the Gaelic influence on the more I look into is, and especially kind of going up to the Western Isles, and seeing how important whiskey was to Gaelic culture, not in a vast, heavy drinking way, but just kind of part and parcel of what it was, of an identification with place. And then noticing the references in Gaelic song and it's a part of whiskey's history that really hasn't been written about. All the way up to, I suppose, 1816, 1823, they're like a kind of great change in legislation, which ushered in the kind of new look, commercialized whiskey industry. Prior to that, if you look at it, it's all talking about the gaugers, the excise men trying to control illicit whiskey or trying to understand, trying to exert some sort of control over whiskey production as a whole, and saying we can't understand these people because they all speak Gaelic. And the fundamental shift that took place within whiskey as a result of the 1823 Act, where it moved away from being this kind of small scale, localized community spirit into something which is much more commercialized. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but as soon as that happened, then following that, the Highland clearances that took place, the whole kind of Gaelic approach to making whiskey and thinking about whiskey and talking and singing and speaking about whiskey was lost completely. And it's nice to see that beginning to reassert itself in some distilleries on the Western Isles. So it's something I'm really interested in.
Yeah, and I mean, do you put that down to you mentioned Speyside, I think, as one of the reasons why you're whiskey took off in a big way there was, the inapproachability of Speyside, the place where illicit distillers could actually carry on fairly undisturbed. And of course, then it became the hub of, and actually became the center of commercial, I suppose, from that point.
Yeah. It's a fascinating one. Yeah, but Speyside, when you think of where the main illicit activity was taking place in Speyside, it was, in the very far south, which is the remote part, which is Glenlivet.
Yeah.
And, and everybody hears of Glenlivet, and Glenlivet is a brand. And then those folk who've been watching, who are watching, if you've been to Glenlivet, it's actually pretty remote. And actually, the second legal distillery in Glenlivet was only built in the 1960s, which was it was a hard place to get to. But as soon as the railway went in, it became, all of a sudden, it becomes, it becomes easier to make whiskey. The transportation of the whiskey out of the region, casks coming in, coal eventually coming in, etc. So Speyside kind of opened up. So it was the easiest one for the blenders in Perth and in Glasgow to get access to. And any distilleries in the far north, because there were a lot of distilleries in the far north, simply because of difficulty of transportation, they began to fall on the wayside. And it's again, it's kind of interesting to look at the kind of that thread of distilleries up the northeast coast. They're all on the railway line. I worked out it's the only whiskey region in Scotland where you can visit. Every distillery up there is next to a railway station.
All right, okay. So it'll be a nice tour.
Yeah, it's quite a nice one actually. If you're ever allowed to travel again, it'd be quite nice.
So when that opens. We don't in Ireland. We don't have this concept of the regionalised whiskies, not naturally anyway. I think Scotland does, but is that identity and the disparity between the different regions getting blurred?
I think it's always been blurred, to be perfectly honest. It was very good. It's kind of how blenders defined whiskies.
Right.
We've got this smoky stuff, that's I love, etc., etc. And then it became more kind of refined. I would say with the launch of classic malts by what was UDD, now Diageo. Had distilleries all across Scotland and said, okay, right, now we can actually say, well, different types of whiskey and different distilleries are in all these different places. And from that point on, it began to become kind of fixed in stone that, everything from the lowlands was this style and everything from Speyside was that style. Everything from the highlands was this. Yeah. And it doesn't bear up to any intellectual scrutiny whatsoever. I use the analogy on a regular basis. But if you go to Dufton, how can you compare Mortlach and Dufton Distillery, which is right next door to it? They're completely different beasts. So the more you look at regionality, the more that whole idea that it kind of defines flavor kind of falls apart.
Yeah. I mean, that was one of the really interesting things, and the very noteworthy thing is that distilleries almost next to each other can have such different taste profiles, and it could be, well, we don't know sometimes. We just simply can't pin down why exactly. Like it's like two identical casks almost giving a different profile.
Yeah, and isn't that the joy of whiskey?
Absolutely. Yeah, no,
that's the absolute beauty of it. Like that you've got three distilleries right next to each other on the south coast of Islay. They all make whiskey, but they do not make the same style. And even when one of them tried to make the same style as its neighbour, it didn't work. It became something else. So there is something incredibly important and incredibly powerful about the individuality of the distillery itself, and that in terms of single malt, that's what I'm far more interested in than trying to kind of shoehorn everything into this regional thing.
I think it is the disparity, but in a way, it's also the imperfections that make them interesting as well. I'm not saying necessarily imperfections, but the little nuances, the little idiosyncrasies that exist within malts. That's what makes it all so fascinating. If you had a perfect whiskey, would it be interesting? Look, I'm having a whiskey. I don't know if you're going to have a dram at all.
Yeah, I'll have a dram with you. What are you drinking?
So I'm having one that I know you are fond of, which is a Powers John Lane.
Oh, yes.
So it's definitely become my go-to whiskey. So, what is your opinion on the dramatic growth of Irish whiskey? And are there any caveats that anything that we should learn from what's happened in Scotland?
I'm hugely excited by it. You know, I don't see it. I see this as kind of a reset for our rebirth for Irish whiskey rather than the Renaissance. You know, it's kind of Irish whiskey 2.0.
Yeah.
You know, it's a chance. It's a chance for Irish whiskey to redefine itself, to learn from the past, but actually move things forward. So, having a clean slate is actually a very exciting thing to have, you know, and what I look forward to is a huge array of different flavors and different styles and different approaches taking place, rather than trying to follow one particular template. And I don't know. I'm not saying that is what's happening, but with 35 odd distillery,
plus
with Bonders starting up as well, there's a huge opportunity to kind of widen the remit of what Irish whiskey is. So yeah, I'm very, very excited about it. You know, and I think the way in which the big distillers, you know, I mean, I'm having something as well. I found this bottle on the shelf. I was wondering what to get, and I found, and it was something Kevin O'Gorman gave me at Ballymaloe a few years back.
Okay.
When we did a tasting, but I'm buggered if I can remember what it is. But
I hope it's whiskey.
Oh, it's whiskey. It's quite definitely whiskey. And then we were doing a talking oak. Sort of a funny feeling. It's something.
Right. For sure, a pot still.
It's definitely. Oh, good God! It's definitely a pot still. I would say it's definitely a very old pot still.
Nice.
It's phenomenal. So we're probably, it's a heavy pot as well. So we're actually in very similar camp there. It's gorgeous. It's from 1991. There we go.
Oh, very nice. Yeah.
From Warehouse 9, if that means anything. Cask 48871. So if anybody from IDL is watching, I'm sure you'll be able to work out all that.
Yeah. Well, I haven't memorized all the 1.5 million casks that they have down there. But
it's launching.
Dave, I just want to go back and look at what some of your achievements have been, and it really is phenomenal. So, you mentioned you worked in odd bins for a while. Then you were a pub landlord in Bristol.
I was. Yep.
And then you began writing for the off-license news. Was that your first entry into using your degree?
No, well, I'd done some writing when I was in Bristol, running the pub. I did some writing, did some music writing. So I was writing about jazz and various things, and that was kind of what I was wanting to do. I was beginning to get odd pieces in national papers and blah blah blah. I thought, well, okay, that's kind of where it's going to go. Yeah. And then when the pub closed, when the lease ran out in the pub, I needed a job, and then all of a sudden the job with OLN appeared, and and that was it. But so I had a drinks experience and a bit of writing experience, so it kind of all. Yeah,
I mean, are there, writing about music, jazz in particular, I suppose, is it that big a stretch to be writing about whiskey from that? The language can often be quite similar.
The language could, so rather than having irate musicians kind of berating you for daring to criticize them in a creative, in a constructive way, you've now got distillers doing the same. But yeah, I mean, it's yes, because I mean, what you're doing when you're approaching a piece of music or writing or whatever, it's exactly the same as what you're doing with a glass of whiskey. It's speaking to you. How is it speaking to you? How is it expressing itself? And also that when you look further, whiskey making is a creative exercise. It's not push button. It's not computers. It's people that are making it. People that are making the decisions. So the parallels are there. I think it's absolutely valid. So no, it wasn't a huge jump. I must admit.
And obviously, you've been nominated for and won many awards for your writings. And I think probably what distinguishes you a lot about the writings, because you do some technical writings, of course, as well. Yeah. And you write for the WSCT, the training material, and obviously you give a lot of talks and lectures. But in your books, they're not so necessarily technical. They are more cultural analysis a lot of the time of the liquids.
Yeah.
Is that a fair comment?
That's very kind of you to say so. Yeah. I've long believed that the one element that we tend to forget about when we're talking about whiskey, especially, it could be rum as well. I've done some bits and pieces in rum.
Yeah.
Is place. Is place and people.
Yeah.
And that has to be part and parcel of the story. And it's a fascinating way to get it because, as a young whiskey writer, as a new whiskey writer, I wanted to absorb all that technical information. Sure. I wanted to understand, what worts were, what wort clarity meant, what angles of line arms were, and I am no chemist, I'm not a scientist, but I wanted to get into the gubbins of it and try and, as I think perhaps we all do, find the secret lies in the technical data. Yeah. And then after a couple of years, I think I came through the other side and realized that, yes, all of that is really important. And the knowledge of that is really important if you're making it. But the only reason that you have that knowledge when you're making it is because you want to create something with flavor and you want to create something which is expressive. And that is what it's about. So it's about place and it's about people and it's about culture. Yeah. So the way in which people talk about whiskey and engage with whiskey or any spirit, it fascinates me more, I would say, than just writing another piece about what distillery looks like.
Yeah. I mean, you have described whiskey as a humble drink and you've described it as, boiled beer. But I mean, beyond that, what it does do is, and I think you describe it as a shared vocabulary of whiskey in which to share stories, and the traditional links and the innovative links is what are at the roots of whiskey culture.
Yes, absolutely. It's a drink which has the extraordinary ability to bring people together and to start conversations and to form friendships and to allow people to think, allow people to perhaps dream, but yet allow people to think. It's an inspirational drink if taken in the right quantities, which not too expensive, because then you forget what the great inspiration was. So it does have that ability to trigger ideas, and it's a global community as well. The way in which one of the most joyous things which I've experienced in this career, if you want to call it that, is the way in which whiskey is now being made in pretty much every country in the world. That everybody is coming at it from their own angle. And the most successful ones are all coming at it from their own angle. But they're all talking to each other. They're going, well, I'm proud of what I'm doing. Well, how do you do that? I might borrow that, I might adapt that. So that there's this, it's a democratic drink. I think that was the other thing. It's a humble drink, it's a democratic drink. Everybody, doesn't matter if you're working for the biggest distiller in the world, you will want to talk and learn from somebody who's just starting up and likewise. So the flow of information, certainly on, maybe not on the marketing side, but certainly on the production side, is extraordinary. So it's a real community, a real community.
Mick McGuire has a question there. He says, are there any of the new distilleries that have captured your interest or imagination in what they're doing or how they are doing it?
Yeah, I mean, I love what Peter Mulryan's doing down at Blackwater. He's a great guy. Huge amount of time for him, old friend. Dingle, I've loved from pretty much the word goes since he sent me some samples over. That was amazing. I did a lovely chat on Lockdown 2. Was it Lockdown 2? Maybe it was
yes.
Lockdown 2 with Noel.
The
stuff that's coming out of one of the Ferguson brands, I think.
Our Square Distillery,
and good grief, that is going to be amazing. I think once their own stuff comes through, I think that's going to be exciting. What Waterford are doing is really, really intellectually fascinating. So I'm very keen to observe that. Everything that Teeling does is gold as far as I'm concerned. So yeah, I could go on. There's some great stuff coming out of Ireland. I think once I think the power went, just as we were kind of talking about this. I think once distilleries get over that hump of having to use third party liquid, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with using third party liquid as long as you declare it. Then I think you'll begin to see individual personalities coming through, and you'll see that kind of greater diversification, because that is kind of what Irish whiskey perhaps lacks at the moment because of supply. It's not quite going, well, we're doing this and this and this and this and this. But I think give it another decade is going to be extraordinary.
No, I mean, exciting times definitely ahead, in terms of, because at the moment the differentiating between the distilleries is really down to the cask. And the sources are limited at the moment, but that is changing.
Yeah, I mean, there's a finite supply, and I all credit to the people who are blending and actually creating their own personalities with very, very limited availability of stock. It's not like Scotland, where you have 100 plus. 140 distilleries now.
140 distilleries, in operation now at the moment.
So, if you were setting up, and doing something like wanting to use third-party liquid, you can get a vast array of different component parts. And I think the skill of the guys in Ireland in creating brands which have their own distinct individual qualities and personality from an incredibly small pool of liquid. I think that excites me, because that shows that there's real skill at work already, and that will just continue to improve and improve as their own whiskey begins to mature.
Yeah, another one in there from John Malios in Greece. How do you see the increase of Irish whiskey in terms of overall competition to Scotch in the forthcoming year, in particular in relation to Brexit?
I think we're all trying to get our heads around the whole Brexit thing. I would say that if our current British government continues in the way that they are, then Scotch whisky won't be affected by Brexit, because Scotland will be independent and will rejoin the EU. So that kind of avoids that one. I think, in terms of competition to Scotch, yes, I think there is huge competition to Scotch, but it's not just coming from Ireland. It's coming from every other country in the world, and it's coming from other spirits as well. Scotland has had a hegemony on whiskey for pretty much 100 years. Mm-hmm. Prohibition started in 1919 in some parts of the States. So Scotch kind of has ruled for 100 years, and had everything its own way. And now the situation has changed, and there's much more whiskey now appearing on the market, and very good whiskey from all around the world. But people aren't drinking more whiskey. People are drinking pretty much the same level of whiskey, but spreading their love of whiskey around a wider number of brands and a wider number of countries. And that will cause, I think, Scotch's share of the overall market begin to chip away, and Ireland will have a role to play in that chipping away of Scotch's hegemony. And I think that is also a great spur to Scotch distillers to do something about it, and to not change fundamentally, but actually define themselves and actually find new ways of talking about it. So it's a spur to creativity, I think. So it's a good thing. But
I think you do start to see that
Scotch is it's not under threat, but I do think its dominant position, it will not have as dominant a position going forward.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose there's a kind of case of being in your comfort zone maybe for too long, and now the young guns are coming in and challenging maybe, or at least adding to the market.
I think that was certainly the case. I would say a few years back. I used to say, Scotch was kind of suffering from this kind of existential crisis. The the rest of the world was sort of defining themselves against Scotch and saying, I'm from Norway and I'm making my whiskey this way because I'm not Scotch and I'm doing this. And Scotch didn't really know what it was, because it had no competition. I mean, it clearly wasn't bourbon, so fine, no, that's okay. We're doing all this thing, but suddenly you get all these single malts from all around the world, and it's kind of, whoa, hang on a minute, they're kind of stealing our clothes. So what do we stand for? I think that's being addressed. I don't think that is necessarily the case.
No, I don't think Scotland will give up its crown in a rush.
No.
And rightly so. Why shouldn't they? I mean,
but also, the fact is that Scotch has been built on blends. And I love blends, and blends are phenomenal. But blends are under pressure, especially in mature markets.
I mean, the single malt slowly really started taking off in the 90s, really, I suppose, didn't they? And
it's a very new category. When you look at 100 odd years, 200 odd years.
Yeah, and it's still a very small proportion of the market, actually, if you think about it. In terms of interest, it punches well above its weight. Yeah. But in terms of look, you've written a number of books about other drinks as well, so it's not just so. You've written this one here, the gin, the manual, rum, the manual.
Yep.
Whiskey the manual. I mean, and then this is, of course, one of your well-known books, The World Atlas of Whiskey, and I'll come to that in a minute. But and then your latest book, The Way of Whiskey. I've seen the images in it now, and I haven't read I've only read some of the summary of it, Dave, I'll be honest. But in terms of the photography, it's phenomenal.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah. Taki is just an incredible photographer. And we essentially did a 3-week trip around Japan. So he was with me all the way. So the book is kind of the road trip, but it's looking at the parallels between Japanese whiskey making and Japanese craft, traditional Japanese craft. So it was a dream. It was a dream trip.
So you've done the gin and the rum and the whiskey. The gin, I mean, I wouldn't know enough about gin to make any comments, so I won't. But rum is an interesting one, and rum interesting in the sense that we talked about this earlier about the actual impact of rum, in particular Cuban rum, on how ingrained it is in the society. And again, that's a common theme that seems to run through your books as well, the cultural elements of the spirit of its time. So, in Japan, obviously the cultural respect and the integration there, Scotch is obvious. I mean, if you get to write an Irish one, you'll find it there as well. But the Japanese one, can you tell us a little bit about that? How long it took to, and what was the motivation for doing that?
It kind of took me, I don't know, 15 odd years to write it, I suppose. I mean, I began going to Japan in year 2000, but I was out there every year, like twice, maybe 3 times a year for a long time. And just speaking with Japanese distillers, and just becoming, I've always been fascinated by Japan anyway. And just getting slightly deeper into the culture and actually looking at Japan, not just through a whiskey lens, but just looking at Japan and beginning to kind of think, well, there does seem to be this shared way of looking at aesthetics, whether that's art, poetry, or ceramics, or design, art, or whatever. This simplicity, this modesty, this kind of understated quality, complexity, but understated complexity. It seems paradoxical.
Yeah.
And it struck me that was very similar to the way that Japanese whiskey is about. Japanese whiskey doesn't shout at you. It's calm, it's quiet, it's complex. It's very, very highly tuned. It's aromatically intense, but not powerful. And it just struck me that is remarkably similar to the approaches that appear to be taken in the rest of Japanese culture. So I thought, all right, I'll punt this utterly ludicrous theory to my publisher, and she went, yeah, that's a great idea. And then I went, okay, now I have to go to Japan and actually find out if this mad theory is actually the case. Because I hadn't actually bothered checking if anybody in Japan actually thought that. But it turned out they did. And sort of without prompting, the way in which a whiskey distiller or whiskey blender talked about their whiskey was using exactly the same language and exactly the same principles as an amazing ceramicist or an amazing paper maker. So yeah, a few. But yeah, I mean, it runs through everything. It runs through chefing, it runs through bartending and everything. You know, there are these kind of building blocks of creativity that everybody seems to tap into.
Yeah, we kind of talked about that earlier, how, even becoming a chef, you specialize on making rice for 3 years, or, the thought process of, making samurai swords and laying aside steel that won't be used for 150 years.
Yeah.
I mean, and that permeates in the whiskey business as well there.
Yeah, it does. And I think, it's interesting to see what's happening in Japan, because, the fingers crossed this year that they will actually finally have some legislation. So they'll be defining what Japanese whiskey is at last.
Yeah.
There's a lot of new distilleries starting up. There are a lot of new genuine whiskey distilleries starting up. There's a lot of new brands appearing from distilleries that don't exist. But again, like Ireland, I think in a decade's time, I think we're going to see some very, very interesting new Japanese whiskies coming out.
Yeah. So a question here from James Doherty from Sleeve League Distillery, saying rum has been the coming category for 20 years. When do you think it will actually break through?
Hi, James. Thank you. I remember the very first time I said rum's going to be the next big thing was in off-license news in, I think, 1994. And I said the same. I pretty much said the same thing for the next decade or so. And then I stopped saying it. But so I'm really wary about saying it is the next big thing. But yeah, there does seem to be fantastic momentum behind rum now. Great. It's really, really great to see. And it's really fascinating to see so many whiskey drinkers moving across the rum and not leaving whiskey, but going, actually, rum is as fascinating. It's got all these different flavors. It's got, fundamentally different ways of making it. But, the difference between Cuba and Jamaica, two islands right next door to each other, and the styles of rum are so different that, if you like big, heavy, smoky whiskies, weird whiskies, then Jamaica is the place for you. If you want things which are more understated and elegant, then you can go to Barbados, or you can go to the top-end Cuban, and it's just an extraordinary spirit. I love it to bits. So will it break through? I think, to be honest, I think it probably has to some extent broken through. It lacks a major kind of premium brand. I think Havana Club was probably closest to that, and that maybe is what has held rum back a little bit. But I think every year it's moving forward, and there's 10 distilleries in Scotland making rum now.
Yeah, and there's a few here now. There's a couple down in Kerry or Cork, and Brendan up in Lowen is making rum as well. But it's one of those things that, as you said, has been breaking through for so long. But I also think that maybe distribution seems to be a big issue with the rum, because I've tried some phenomenal, very limited rums. Rums that are absolutely amazing, but they're producing 3,000 bottles a year, and you don't get the chance to almost hear about them. But
well, I mean, it's the same with single malt. There will be a finite supply if you're coming from one small distillery. But which kind of sort of jumping about a little bit, which has been an issue which has bedeviled the new Australian whiskey industry. Kind of similar to rum in that respect. Lots of small distillers making remarkable whiskies, but nobody with volume. And rum has kind of lacked that big brand, and I think that that will begin to change. I think Appleton's gearing up. I think El Dorado, if it sorts itself out, has got volume. Havana Club has got volume. So there are these bigger brands which will be able to kind of establish the category, and then you will have smaller scale releases off the back of that, which will be in finite supply. But that's the nature of the beast. But you always have to have that mix.
Yeah. One here, Mick. I don't think this is a whiskey question. My wife just said she could listen to you all night. So I'm sure that's a comment you haven't had before, but never mind. I think Nick Ryan behind Irish Whiskey and Spirits Institute is he's talking about Jamaican rum, the Hampden Estate, which I've tried actually at one of his tastings. Fantastic.
Yeah, Hampden's just fantastic, big, funky, classic old style pot still Dunder muck pit Jamaican. But also in Jamaica, Worthy Park are doing some amazing rums as well. So there's a real renaissance in those kind of big funky Jamaican styles.
What is it that sets whiskey aside, and if you like above all those other? I mean, you've got your cognacs, your brandies, you've got your other spirit. What is it about whiskey that gives an emotional connection that no other spirit can really give?
I wish I knew the answer to that one. If I did, I would try and set myself up as a consultant rather than an impoverished freelance writer. I honestly wish I knew what that secret was. But and kind of going back to what we were saying earlier, it does somehow has that ability to draw people together. I think rum has it as well, to be honest.
Yeah. You think rum does have that?
Yeah. I think rum has the ability to make people smile.
Yeah. I've smiled with many a rum, but perhaps that's
not a bad thing to have. And I love cognac. I mean, I'm a huge fan of cognac. I've never quite got that. In a company, I've never quite got to that stage.
Yeah.
That kind of that whiskey does. I love tequila and mezcal, but again, the evening goes in a different direction.
Yeah, I mean, there are spirits, and there are many other spirits that I enjoy, sometimes more than whiskey, but they don't invoke the emotion that the whiskey brings out, and and that's even if I don't even know anything about the whiskey, so I don't know what's going on there, but it's what makes whiskey intriguing.
It is that, but it's also, I suppose, it's familiarity. There is some part of us kind of going, well, actually, this is made in my country, or and maybe it's just a flavor that you intuitively understand.
Yeah, it could be.
And if I was living in the Caribbean, then I would probably feel exactly the same about rum. And if I was in Mexico, I'll be doing exactly the same with agave. It's just there are just it's. I remember going on a walk up a hill with Jim Beveridge, who's the master blender at Johnny Walker, and we were having a chat on the way back down, and we were just talking about flavour and just in general terms, not a geeky thing, just kind of general thing about different aromas that were kind of appearing as they were walking down the hill, and he said, well, he said, I've always wondered whether a lot of these early distillers tried to capture where they were in their whiskey. And he said, it's impossible to prove one way or another, but if you're brought up around the smell of heather and honey, or you're perhaps want to try and get that into your drink. So I think there are triggers within whiskey which we intuitively understand because they are there in our foods. They're there in our food culture. So maybe that's the connection. Quite why that then translates to pretty much every other country around the world who then looks at whiskey and goes, I get it. I don't know. But yeah.
Tell me, you've written those books. How long does it take to sit down and put together one of these books? Is it a year? Is it 2 years? I mean, you've written 12, 13 books.
Yeah, some are very small. But yeah, I would say, yeah, usually about a year and a half.
Yeah, and is it something you have planned out? What's your approach to writing one? Do you have a careful plan that you
I have a very
follow?
careful plan. Yeah, I mean, a lot of research. You know, and I'm working on one at the moment, which is actually meant to have been with my publisher in October, but COVID.
Yeah.
So I'm still kind of at research stage. So the research is just getting more and more extraordinary. So yeah, a lot of research and then pretty rapid writing.
Yeah.
You know, so I'll begin to, I'll sketch it out. We'll work out the flat plan. We work out the approach, design, etc., and all the research. And I'll begin to write it and begin to kind of piece it together, because I'll be doing other stuff at the same time. Then eventually, you know, all that other stuff begins to fall away, and it becomes just kind of mad book writing. But I've kind of got to then do it as a chunk.
Yeah. You sit down and do it in one go, almost.
No, I mean, not quite, but you know, it will be like every day I'll get up and write. Okay, it's going to be this section. It's going to be that section. So it becomes all consuming. But the writing process then is relatively speedy because I've done all that prior work.
The research material, but I mean, you don't. I wouldn't describe your work as a transcription of research either, you know, because it is so well written. There's a poetic nature to it, and obviously you must have your creative days and your days where you're saying, okay, you know.
Oh yeah, I mean, you know what it's like. You know, some days it seems to come relatively easily, and other days, and more often than not, it can be a bit of a struggle, and you've just got to push through.
Yeah.
If you're not happy with it, change it. You know, but I'm never 100% happy with anything I write. You know?
Well, and that's the other thing is, when do you know when to let go and decide? Well, that's it. That's good.
When my publisher then phones me up going, Dave, you are now over that deadline.
Yeah, I know that feeling. Yeah,
because I'm commissioned to write the next edition of the Atlas. So, but quite how, you know, that is just going to be a mammoth one. That's going to be a complete rewrite and redesign and everything, because there's so many new whiskies, which is a good thing.
Yes.
But I mean, the research for that is going to be, that's going to be pretty hardcore.
Yeah, one thing I noticed is that the research you do is firsthand. You go to these places, you visit them. You know, like with your rum books and your book on Japanese whiskey, you spend a lot of time in these places, and you really. Is it important that you do that?
I think it depends on the book. For the Japanese book, I couldn't have done that without it. The Scottish book that I'm working on at the moment, fingers crossed we'll be able to finish it. I'm doing that with another photographer friend. Fingers crossed we'll be able to do it. For that has to be on the ground. The Atlas, where possible, yes, I will visit as many distilleries as possible, but it's not. You can't visit every distillery in the world anymore. So yeah, it kind of, the manuals didn't involve any travel necessarily, or any extensive travel, because they're based around the liquid in the bottle.
Yeah.
But my previous rum book, which was, I went and visited the Caribbean and wherever.
Well, you did the movie as well.
And we did the Cuban movie, which was great fun.
Yeah. How long did you spend out in Cuba altogether? Was it?
Doing that shoot was 2 weeks, 3 weeks. It was a really. I think the guys were there for 4 weeks. We did 3 weeks shooting. Yeah. But you know, it's Cuba, so it's not an easy place to make a film.
No, I can imagine that. You've written for some of the world leading whiskey magazines as well. So obviously Whiskey Magazine, Whiskey Advocate. You've written for ScotchWhiskey.com, and you were the technical advisor or technical engineer behind that.
Chief engineer, yeah. I just want to give myself a title like Scotty in Star Trek. So.
All right. Yeah. Yeah, I mean that's still it's still a fantastic reference. That ScotchWhiskey.com, I have to say.
Yeah, it was a real shame that had to go. I loved that. It was a brave try.
Yeah. Well, I'm hoping that it will actually make a comeback as well. There's no reason. Yeah. But what's different? Obviously, you're writing for a magazine. What's different in your approach to writing for a publication as opposed to writing a book? Is it a mindset? Is it just the length of the articles? Or
I mean, it's a mindset. You're going to be far more focused when you're writing for a magazine, because you'll be writing maybe a thousand words, maybe if you're lucky 1,500 words or whatever. So it's got to be tighter. It's got to be there can't be as much what would seem superfluous details. And it's quite interesting actually having done some work with films now.
Yeah.
I think you're seeing how having too many characters and too much, actually you lose the story. So I think that is, so making a film is a bit, magazine writing is a bit like making a film. You're cutting away to actually get to the absolute heart of it.
Yeah.
So whereas with the book, the nature of the book is that I think you've got to allow yourself the ability, given you have a book, to be more expansive to, yeah.
So, I mean, you have the space, I suppose, to have a beginning, middle, and end.
Sorry?
Yeah, you have the space, I suppose, to have a beginning, middle, and end in a book, because it's more difficult to do in a magazine.
I think you have to have a beginning, middle, and end in a magazine article as well. But just, you just got to be more. It's a different sort of discipline.
Yeah. What do you? Because you obviously do a lot of writing for your own website now, the whiskymanual.uk, and in it you mentioned the fact that it took you a long time to do it, and you finally got around to doing it, but the why I found really fascinating in terms of what's happened to writing, what has changed in journalism and the way people communicate, the way the message is spread, how branding has overtaken, if you like, content and value.
Oh yeah, it's tough out there.
Yeah, well, what do you make of these changes that are happening? Like, I mean, there's a blog post every second, I'd say, on whiskey. There's people that have never really written before and are writing. What do you make of all of the changes that are happening?
I think it's an inevitability of the world that we live in. That we. Everybody who has a laptop will be able to share their opinion.
Yeah.
And I'd be wrong of me, utterly wrong of me, to say that your opinion is not valid, because obviously everybody's opinion is valid, and it's good to have that debate. What worries me is the lack of quality outlets for good writing and long form journalism.
Yeah.
Because they're becoming fewer and far between. And that was one reason that ScotchWhiskey.com eventually foundered, was because the industry, although the industry loved it, the industry's model has shifted. So they're not putting as much money into advertising, certainly in the UK. They are finding new ways. So why place an ad for your whiskey in a magazine? Which might interest a few people, when you could get an influencer to stand with a nice bottle around, not me obviously, but stand with a nice bottle and put it up on Instagram, and all of a sudden they get 1 million hits or whatever. So the model has changed.
Yeah.
I'm worried about how to get that information out there. I think it's very important to get good quality information out there. And the other thing is, it's taking a kind of dark turn now, but, we're living these increasingly compartmentalized lives. Whether, before lockdown, we were incredibly, compartmentalized lives. So all we were doing was kind of shouting at each other about one particular thing, that's the only thing we're interested in, rather than looking collectively, rather than looking in terms of community. And that, I think, from a societal point of view, is a dangerous thing. And as a result of this kind of really compartmentalized thinking, I think the quality of writing has fallen, simply because the outlets aren't there to actually allow this information to flow and to find these wider connections. So, yeah.
It kind of, there's a tinge of sadness that I have to say. I agree that, people are defining themselves not as writers now. To some extent, they're defining themselves as maybe influencers first, and then writers. And that. But maybe I'm of that age, I suppose, that I have a romantic age of when writing was writing, and opinion was a little bit more valued and well put together.
But I look at your magazine. You're making a fantastic success of printing. Beautiful magazine, beautifully laid out, high quality, really great writing. It's not just because I'm on here. Really great writing, really compelling. You want to read it from cover to cover, but there's not enough of you.
Well, I think this. I mean, without sounding ridiculous, it's great to be able to put that together. But I do find that is the patience for somebody to sit down and read something. And I thank you for the compliments, but to sit down and read it is going.
Yeah,
that's the reality.
I think that's it. And also, I mean, again, one of the learnings from Scotch whisky was that the articles have to be shorter than they would be in a magazine, because you simply don't have the patience for it to scroll up. So, and the problem with that, and this kind of comes back to that earlier point, the problem with that is that everything then is reduced. I was just saying that magazine writing is about kind of discarding things and get to the nub of it. But the nub of it in terms of online communication is essentially the tasting note or the press release, which has just been reprinted, which is where magazines have to come in. The magazines are the repository of good quality long form journalism.
But I think even a magazine on its own, even a magazine on its own, it's very hard to avoid having those press releases and those news snippets in it. But
you have to have that balance. Yes, I mean, you have to have a news section. Yes, but at the same time, you have the opportunity to allow people to wander off.
Linda Madigan there from Sweden, it says, now that we're more in the virtual space, how can we bring the experts to the new consumers? I think we need to keep the tasting experience.
Yeah, I agree 100%, Linda. I do. I've been doing a fair number of these, and not as many as other people, but a fair number of these Zoomy tastings and stuff. And they're very hard. They're hard to do because you can't read the room.
Yeah.
So if I'm doing a class, what's the room, what's the space, who are the people, what level are they at, how many jokes can you crack? Are they going? Is this going to be a geek session, or is this going to be something else, or whatever? And you tailor you don't have a script. You tailor the tasting to suit the room, and everybody does that. And you can't do that on here because you can't read body language because if you only see somebody's face.
Well, see, this is one of the things that they're saying is leading to Zoom and online fatigue, is because your mind automatically, the one thing it wants to do is try and interpret the situation. Yep. And it's a difficult thing to do when you don't have that physical context to do it. And, when you're trying to do such a physical thing as tasting whiskey, which is a tactile experience, it's not a,
I find it, the one thing that I mean, it's been a necessary evil. For the past while, and I think it will continue in some form. But the thing that worries me about it is it's kind of taking whiskey tasting back to where it was 10 years ago, where it was, right, okay, everybody, because you got to be more formulaic about it. Pick up the glass. And you're almost saying, this is what it smells of, rather than allowing it to the conversation to flow, because you can't do that in these situations. At the same point, we did the virtual whiskey show last year, which had like 300 different booths and tastings and tasting packs and everything and blah blah blah, and it was a huge success. So much so that, and we could do things there that we couldn't have done.
That's the irony. Yeah, I mean, the irony is it opens doors and shuts others that are kind of subliminal. Yeah.
So there were classes that we could do on that we couldn't have done because of architecture. So I think there will be some positives coming out of this, and I think we will see a lot more. We'll see more training online. We'll see less people traveling around the world unnecessarily, which is a good thing. And I count myself in that. I would like to see, obviously, whiskey shows coming back and more face-to-face tastings, but I think there will be a kind of hybrid thing starting up. But also, the other thing is I don't think we've tapped into the creative possibilities of this framework yet. We're still doing business meetings essentially, rather than TV magazine shows.
Yeah. I think it'll evolve. It's still early days, I suppose. And I suppose my one concern would be is I hope that we can go back to being more human after it's all. What's the adjustment going to be afterwards? But sure, this is life, and I wanted to talk a little bit about your movie, The Amber Light, and I've watched it a couple of times, and it's, if anybody's looking to see that movie and is expecting to learn how to make whiskey and the technical intricacies of what whiskey is, they are going to be disappointed. I think. But if somebody wants to get to the essence of what whiskey means to somebody, and what it means to community and sense of place and being and people, it hasn't been done any better than it's been done now. I mean that now. I think because it's such a hard thing to capture. How do you capture, a sense of belonging, a sense of place with a spirit? And I think, the Amber Light does it extremely well. I mean, it's a joy to watch, and it's one of those things that you don't have to love whiskey to enjoy it.
Well, thank you. It's very, very kind of you to say so. And I'm glad. I mean, that last comment is perfect. That was one of the aims of it. This is a film about whiskey, but it's not a whiskey film.
Yes.
You know what I mean? So it's using whiskey as a way to look at a bigger issue. So
but that's one of the things I like about the work they've done is it tends to be about the bigger issue and not just the drink. And if we want to analyze taste and just analyze taste, then it can become mundane. And yes, it's interesting in its own light, but the why is, as people say, is the interesting part.
Why is the best word? Always why. If you're stuck for a question as a journalist, just ask why. It'll give you time to think. But it's the most interesting word to use. And no, I mean, we didn't want to make a whiskey film, and decided very, very early on that we wouldn't film in distilleries. We only filmed in one distillery, which is Daft Mill. And the reason we filmed there was because Francis was there. We wanted to speak to Francis. Yeah. Because if we had filmed at one distillery, we would then have had to film at another 5.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
And it becomes repetitive, and it's kind of, but they do this, and all of a sudden you're back in the whiskey film.
Yeah. How important was it that you were brand independent?
Oh, vital. Yeah. We didn't want to take any money from brands for it. I don't, to be honest. I've got a good relationship with distillers. I don't think it would necessarily have compromised from an editorial point of view, but there probably would have been some pressure that in there.
Yeah.
So, yeah, from the outset we went, no, we're going to sit completely out with, because we were offered money.
Sure. Yeah.
But foolishly turned it down.
Well, that's always the artist's dilemma, I suppose, as to whether. What have you got planned, movie-wise, or you mentioned the book you're working on in Scotland? Can you give us a little bit of a clue as to what that's going to be?
Yeah, sure. It's kind of the Scottish equivalent of the Japanese book. So It's looking at community. So it's called The Sense of Place. So it's looking at community and what whiskey means to community across Scotland. So it's kind of the story of whiskey going from north to south, because that kind of made sense when we could travel. Yeah. Looking at a lot of what's happening, new things which are happening within whiskey, and ways in which the whiskey industry in Scotland is reconnecting with community. And that could be through cereal, or it could be through oak projects or whatever. So it all sounds a bit vague. But yeah, it's not quite the Amber Light, but some of the ideas in the Amber Light, or which couldn't be used in the Amber Light, will be coming into the book. So yeah. It should be out this autumn, but yeah, we'll wait and see, because it does necessitate another month or so of travel. So.
Yeah. Well, one thing I noticed is that there's a very deep and very real, tangible sense of social awareness and social responsibility in all your work, and that comes from the writings themselves, the understanding of people and their needs. I've seen you at some protests, and even the fact that you encourage people to buy your books at smaller booksellers. Yeah. Is that always the way you've been? Have you always been socially aware and socially responsible? And
I think so. I was. Yeah, it was the way I was brought up. I was brought up in, working class Glasgow. The Red Clydeside. Where community was important. So yeah, I've always had that. I'm not really aware of it, to be perfectly honest.
No, I don't think. I don't think you see it as. I don't think. No, I don't think you see it as a movement necessarily or something. I think it's just ingrained, but it's nice. It makes you, I think, more human, if you like, and more. I think it does sort of come through in your writing. I'm just quoting here that you did something about the. I think it was on your website. Is as a writer, I have to accept the nature of communication is changing. The older models are dying. The world can seem to value image rather than words, and influencers take priority over writers. I suppose that is basically going back to what we did talk about in terms of, the urgency of online and the way things have changed. Do you think that COVID has accelerated that?
It might have, yeah. It might have. I think what worries me, and it's such good news that there is a vaccine out there. I wonder what would have happened if we have another year of having to do this. I think communication will break down completely, and I think people will become more isolated.
Yeah. The irony, as they say, is the more we're the more we're connected, the less in touch we feel with everybody else. It
becomes tough again. I'm noticing it with my wife's parents live quite close to here, and my father-in-law is 90, mother-in-law is 86. And we're allowed to go and see them because they're in our bubble. But we're noticing, especially with my father-in-law, he, becoming more withdrawn.
Yeah.
Simply because they're not seeing it. We are the only people they see. And even kind of meeting when we were allowed to meet socially distanced with friends. Yeah. Conversation is only about COVID, really. You try and change the conversation, but it kind of we're coming all the way back.
In a way, I don't want to just blame COVID, because I think it's the way society perhaps has gone to some extent. I mean, I was only noticing it last night walking home, and in general, if I pass by somebody, you would say hello, even if you don't. But that seems to be, certainly it's gone down an awful lot from where it was. But but it's just an observation. But I have a question here from Chris Sigalis, again from Greece. Yasu, Chris. Dave, speaking about blends, wouldn't a blended malt from 2 or more distilleries from both Ireland and Scotland be interesting? Like Celtic Nations, that was banned by the SWA, I think. Also, has any Scottish distillery experimented using unmalted barley and made pure pot still? Is it allowed? Greetings from Athens.
Okay, you keep that up for there's a few things in there.
Yeah.
It would be interesting. It has been done. It would be interesting. It couldn't be bottled in Scotland, obviously. It would have to be bottled in Ireland because of regulations. But it would be, and I see it happening. I think it's inevitable. I'm not very sure why Celtic Nations was banned, or even if it was, it might have been. But
I don't remember the official. No, it was frowned upon for sure. Yeah,
it was frowned upon. I think there's a kind of rap over the knuckles, but there's nothing to stop that happening.
Yeah,
I think it'd be a really interesting thing to do. Has any Scotch distillery experimented using pure pot still? Yes. Am I allowed to say it? I'll say it anyway. Aylesbury Bay, because that's where all the trials took place. Oh, you've gone.
no, I'm hearing voice. But,
so all the trials took place for Tullamore. For pure pot still took place at Aylesbury Bay. So that's the last I know of single pot still being made in Scotland. But I dare say Loch Lomond probably have done it or are probably doing it. It wouldn't surprise me that other distilleries are looking at it at the moment. So quite definitely something. And it was certainly in the 19th century. There were a number of distilleries in Scotland making pure pot still because it was regarded as the highest quality whiskey around at the time, quite rightly so. And yes, it would be allowed. It wouldn't be able to be called that. It would have to be called a grain whiskey. So it wouldn't be allowed to be called a pure pot still whiskey. But there's nothing to stop it being made in Scotland. So there you go.
Okay, so we're on to backup here. Hear me?
Yep, carrying on.
Yeah, so, and I'll get rid of the reverb here somehow. Are you hearing me, Troy?
Yep, good.
Yeah. So, going forward for Scott, what do you see as the most exciting developments?
I think a lot of the newer distilleries, I find that really exciting. I mean, as well as all the kind of experience with yeast and various other things. I think the way in which a lot of the new distilleries are approaching whiskey in a slightly different way and involving community more. So I'm thinking particularly West Coast. So looking at McNean, which is organic, that's never really been tried before. Ardnamurchan, Razi, Torraveg, so one on Skye, one just off Skye, using local guys, and not really in general using anybody with any distilling experience, people learning on the job, people from the community, Harris as well. And as a result, bringing jobs to remote parts of Scotland where young people would have had to leave and didn't want to leave their homes, didn't want to leave their communities. And suddenly you have a distillery suddenly becoming a hub, which is kind of what the book's about, and seeing the ripples that then produces across the community. So that really excites me. I think one of the projects that I think is ridiculously long-term project, White Mackay driving it, but it's an industry-wide thing on Scottish oak. Okay. So developing Scottish oak, but also helping with reforesting in Scotland. So that is really exciting as well. It's a whole bunch of things happening in Scotland that are exciting. But I think that community-based distillery thing is one that's probably exciting me the most at the moment.
Yeah. In terms of world whiskies, then, other than Irish, of course, what other whiskies, or what other nations are exciting you and what they're doing?
I think there's some really exciting stuff coming out of Scandinavia. I think that's some really good stuff. Some lovely whiskies coming out of New Zealand. There's kind of 3 main distilleries there now. They're making just beautiful, beautiful whiskies. Some very good stuff coming out of Australia. So that's exciting me, and a lot of stuff that I'm beginning to get coming over from the States. So yeah, there's a rich vein of whiskies appearing.
Yeah. And future movie coming from you at all?
Probably not a movie. Adam, who is Irish, so it's an Irish-Scottish co-production now, Amber Light. So we are currently pitching for a series of kind of Amber Light inspired TV streaming series. So the pitching for that is underway, but COVID. People are interested, but nobody can commit to anything at the moment. So we'll see how that happens. But yeah, I mean, it's something that really excites me. So fingers crossed that'll take off. Hopefully this year we'll get a green light this year. So probably won't start filming until late this year, begin probably year after. By which time my beard will be white. But yeah, really, really excited with that project. I can't say too much because it's at stage, but yeah, we've got some great plans.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to ask you about
Ireland. I promise it will include Ireland.
Yeah, well, we are looking. I mean, you have been here quite a few times, so I know you've been at the Ballymaloe Food Festival.
Yeah,
and Livery Festival.
Fantastic thing. Please bring it back, guys. That was awesome. Yeah, I mean, I miss. Yeah, I try and come over as often as I can, but I haven't been over as often as I should be. But as soon as this bloody thing finishes, I'll be hopping over and finding out exactly what's happening on the ground. I've got too many invitations. I've got so many invitations. I really want to come over and enjoy.
That's a nice way. The demographics and the whiskey consumer and whiskey enthusiast has obviously changed quite a bit since you became involved in whiskey earlier. What are the most significant changes, and where do you see it going?
Younger people are. I mean, not just because I'm older, but younger people are definitely drinking it. And when I started writing for Off License News, Scotch whiskey was going through. Irish whiskey almost didn't exist, and Scotch whiskey was going through this huge crash.
Yeah.
And I was always told by kind of marketing guys that we can't innovate, we can't do anything, we can't scare away our drinkers, and people will mature into whiskey. And people would mature into whiskey when they were in their late 30s, early 40s, which is one reason that whiskey continued to plummet. So now, I'm seeing my nieces and nephews in their 20s drinking whiskey and appreciating whiskey and appreciating. So that's changed. And the important word there is my nieces are enjoying it, because many more women are certainly drinking whiskey.
I think
it's kind of is it a global thing? I've certainly seen it abroad a lot. In some countries more so than others, but it does seem to be a global trend, a demographic trend, that in those ludicrous barriers that were put up and not challenged by the industry have disappeared completely, which is great news.
Yeah, I mean, I'll touch upon the role of women in whiskey, and obviously there were incidents over the last year in which were probably not desirable, and you do aspire, and I've seen you quote that whiskey transcends age, sexuality, everything. I mean,
absolutely, and I think the whiskey industry has been very good at. I don't think there is a glass ceiling in the whiskey industry. Correct me, please, if I'm wrong. I think the whiskey industry, and certainly speaking to women in the whiskey industry. They're kind of going, well, look at me, you know. But I think the problems, and I think the problems do exist, have come from old or dyed-in-the-wool whiskey fans who believe that it should only be a man's drink. And probably anybody under the age of 50 drinking it, and who don't see there being a role for women. So I think we've got to be very careful to kind of separate what's happened in the industry, which is very open, to what's happened in the mindsets of an older whiskey consumer.
Yeah. Well, I think we'll tend to agree on that for sure. But I mean, in Ireland, certainly, of new people coming to whiskey, the majority are women. And the roles in which they're taking on are more senior roles and more of them.
Yeah, absolutely, and why not? I mean, it's you know, it's ridiculous to think otherwise.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I will believe what my mother says, that they have a better sense of smell and taste. So. So
we're kind of one of the kind of wee side projects I'm working on is something with my dear friend Arthur Motley from Royal Mile Whiskies. And we've got this kind of YouTube thing which pops up every so often called the Liquid Antiquarian, which is us really geeking out over old documents and kind of re-examining some of the perceived truths or myths, perhaps, about drink in general. It could be champagne, could be cognac, could be whiskey. We're working on the next set now, and one of them is actually looking at women in drink in general, but women in kind of in brewing initially. There's going to be one on women in brewing, which is going to be fascinating, and then well, they're all going to be fascinating.
You alluded to that in the movie, I think.
Yeah,
we were, keeping the secrets, and they were the bearers of recipes.
Yeah. I mean, women would have been the distillers. I've got, and this is something which we're actually investigating. I have this theory that up until the illicit era, where in Ireland or in Scotland, in the late 18th century, where it became dangerous to distill. Distilling would probably have been women's work. Because brewing was women's work for a long period of time until beer became kind of commercialized, and then women were eventually. Anyway, you'll have to watch it to find out what.
I'll have to wait. And
I think women would have been would have been distillers, and would have been in charge of distilling in those kind of community situations. And we're just trying to find evidence of that. So it's kind of theory that needs to be examined.
Going back to tasting whiskey, you obviously have a fantastic palate and you're very descriptive in your language. Is that something that you had from the very beginning, or it's
no, developed? Trained, yeah. I mean, when I was at Oddmans, they put me through the WSET up to diploma, and the great thing about Oddmans was that people always used to say, "What's the secret of Oddmans?" Because the staff are so amazing, and I used to say, "Well, the secret is a corkscrew." We were encouraged to, we would encourage to taste. So taste. So I was kind of familiar with the process of tasting, then coming into whiskey, then kind of learning the flavors, learning the language of whiskey. But you're learning all the time. It doesn't become it's not easier. You always have to move forward and learn things. I'm no expert. I'm continually learning new things, and the same with flavor, same with new whiskies that are coming across, and kind of what is that? Where's that coming from? What's that? How do you talk about this? It's endlessly fascinating.
Yeah, no, I think for me it's endlessly fascinating that you're always searching for the reason behind things, not necessarily what they are. And
why,
I don't think you judge them. Yeah. You don't necessarily judge them necessarily on whether it's you like it or not necessarily. I think it's just an understanding that you have an innate inquisitiveness, I suppose.
I think in terms of tasting, is that you get to a point, and it's a tough one, and you've got to pull yourself up on it. But especially if you're writing reviews, is that if I'm drinking something I don't like it, I'll go, actually I don't particularly like that. But if you're tasting it for a review for a magazine or whatever, you've got to assess it in a completely impartial way. So it's not flavor I particularly like, it's not style I particularly like, but is it complex? Is it balanced? Does it do what it sets out to do? If it does, then it works. It doesn't work for me, but it works. So you've got to be able to kind of step back and kind of do that. And it's not.
On blind tastings, then, I mean, do you think all whiskies should be blind tasted, or do you think they need to be put into a context?
Certainly with Whiskey Mag, we always did blind tasting. And that was always very, very interesting. So I think blind tasting. I think blind tasting really works. I think there are contexts where blind tasting makes sense. And equally, if you know what the whiskey is, then yes, I mean you can perhaps be. You don't want to cause offence.
Yeah.
So do you pull your punches? I mean, these days, if something comes across my desk and I don't think it's worked, I don't bother reviewing it.
Yeah.
Because what's the point, really? I'll make that decision.
Yeah. What's the first thing you're going to do, Dave, when COVID?
What's the first thing? I want to meet my friends and give them big hugs over a pint, or two maybe,
and maybe a dram.
I miss hugging people.
Yeah. I say likewise. I think it's the one big thing that.
The one thing I've not missed is travel. To be honest, long haul travel, I've not missed one bit. So I think I would like to think my lifestyle will change and change for the better. So I'm not permanently in Terminal 5.
Yeah. You seem to have done an awful lot of travel. Listen, Dave, we've taken up an awful lot of your time, and I could take up an awful lot more of your time, no problem.
It's been a blast. I've really enjoyed it, Sergius.
It's been a real honor and a pleasure. And, a writer's job is really to, put pen to paper and put words on paper. And a great writer, puts pen to paper and words to paper, but makes them leap off the pages and brings them to life. And, nobody does it better than you, Dave. And I genuinely mean that. It comes through in the movie, it comes through in your work, and in all your writing. So,
well, I'm surrounded by great people, so I can ask fantastic people all these questions. So, as I say, quite genuinely, I ask questions and people give me the information. I put it out there. So if it wasn't for them, here. So it's all down to them.
Well, listen, stay safe. Have a much better year than last year.
Right, can't be any worse, my friend.
Give us a good Scottish cheer.
Slàinte
Slàinte. All right. Thank you very much. And hope to see you in March.
I sincerely hope so. I'll hug you. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. All right. Look forward to that. Thank you very much, Dave.
Thank you.
Take care. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. I mean, we could go on all night, I'm sure. Fascinating to listen to Dave and his down-to-earth and yet really insightful view of whiskey was amazing. So thank you very much, everybody, for coming. Look forward to many more chats during the year. Hopefully we get to go and get outside the office and meet people in person. And in the meantime, look after yourselves. Have a great year. And Slàinte.